I just want to really thank everyone that presented this afternoon. So Mel, we've got Martina and Deb here as well as part of the panel discussion, and we just watched your recording about Waminda, so thanks for sending that through. So now we're going to just have a chat, I suppose, and see what questions come out of the audience. So I will ask if there's any questions. I do have one, but I can be patient. So have we got any questions for any of the speakers from the audience? Yep.
Thank you for all those three presentations, which were really three very different parts of our brain to think about this, and I appreciate that because it has to be a rounded approach. I have a question, comment about, I want to bring the idea of birth on country, being rooted to the land, to the sources of our ancestral knowledge, by talking about placentas. I have worked with some Dakota birth workers across Turtle Island who tell the story of how in their community, when the placenta is always buried, where in the source of the land, on the land where they come from, and for many years in these communities, it was all along a river that crossed what is now the US-Canada border, but all along the river, those communities buried their placentas, and that was, and my apologies, I'm not Indigenous, I'm still learning, and perhaps our speakers can address this, but it was about grounding that child and person. They could always come home. They could always, where that placenta was, you know, a source of spiritual and health and ancestral knowledge, and then the dominant culture decided to flood that whole basin for a dam. So now those peoples cannot access anymore that sacred place. And so, and we know we haven't been talking about placentas, but when we think about the things that we've lost as far as even just long-term well-being that starts with birth, it seems like that's something to mention.
Thanks, Saras.
Can I just say something on that? Just actually in Ireland too, they did bury the placenta, and I came across it's actually all digitized now, but in the 1930s they did they actually had an amazing project. They got school children to interview, I suppose, their elders at the time, if you like, and gather stories, and then they, you know, so they now have digitized all of that, and I found in that archive that they did bury the placenta, and it also then states, and when the midwife, the medical midwife moved in, that stopped, you know, so it stopped in the early 20th century then.
Mel, did you want to speak to that? Can you hear us? Yeah. I'm just not sure. Huh? Can she hear us? I don't know.
The rain's muted. The rain is muted, so maybe can you send her a chat?
Is that working now? Hey Mel, can you hear us?
I can now.
Oh, yep. Sorry about that. I was trying to check it right at the beginning, but we obviously didn't do it thoroughly enough. Hello, I don't know if you can see me there. It's Liz here. We've got a lovely panel of speakers that have just spoken, Martina and Deb. And we just had a question from the audience, from Saraswati Vedam, about placentas and the significance of placentas. in terms of many different Indigenous cultures, I suppose, which Martina just responded to from an Irish perspective, which you probably didn't hear any of that, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I don't want to dump you in it or anything, but if...
It wasn't really a question, it was bringing that into if Mel could speak to...
I'm really sorry, it's hard to hear.
Yes, so can you hear me now, Mel?
Just.
Yeah, okay, I'll speak as loud as I can. This is Saraswati Vedam. I'm a midwife from Western Canada, from the Coastal Salish Nations, and I just made a comment about the significance of birth on country and placentas, and how what we do with placentas is a lifelong connection to the land. And I just wondered if you could, share that for your community.
Absolutely. The placenta is what keeps our babies alive. You know, they provide nutrients to the baby in the womb, and you know it's a second. We treat it as though it's the second baby, and you know, since colonisation, our babies have been thrown in the bin and taken to clinical wastes, and that's why we've become really disorientated with country and the world, because we've been so assimilated and moved from our traditional ways. But the placenta is part of us. It is not just a product of conception. So we do practice cultural ways with placentas. So we do many things because we are saltwater women. Some women, and it depends on which family it is. Some women will bury it, and some people will put it back into the ocean where the fish will eat it, and then we will eat the fish, and it's the cycle of life. And so when we give it back to Mother Earth, when we bury it back into the earth, it's letting Mother Najang know that this baby has been born, and she will then create more oxygen and air for this baby. So it's the cycles.
Thank you.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I think it's an interesting question. When I was researching different birth customs before my travel and visit to the 4 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, placenta handling and customs would come up in the research. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Not really. It's
sorry.
not.
She's struggling.
I think historically and traditionally, placenta burial has been something that has happened. But I always asked at these different facilities that I visited, I always asked, do you have a special way of handling placentas, and do your patients ever ask, to take the placenta with them, or across the board, the answer was no. We just incinerate them. So that's.
Because it's a multi-generational loss.
Yeah, so I think that speaks to where the Indigenous cultures have been strongly held on to, and survived really the colonisation process in a way where some obviously have lost it.
I think another thing that came up around that is just there's this idea that like the gold standard is the Western model, and I mean we know that that's not true, but when I would ask about other traditional practices or beliefs about things that you should do or should not do during pregnancy, for example, people would acknowledge that out there in the world, or like the grandmothers would say that that's what you should do, but we don't do that here. We don't, practice that here. And I don't know how much of, sorry, I don't know how much of that was because they were speaking to me, and they perceived me as a foreigner from the West, and they were worried about being judged. I suspect that there was some of that. Because, for example, in Botswana, there was some interesting research done not that long ago among even highly educated women living in urban centers of the country who, though they seek out like Western medical care for their pregnancies, they also say that they believe in some of these, we call them superstitions, I guess, or traditional beliefs about, behaviors that they should or should not do to preserve, the safety of their child. So I do think that kind of parallel world still exists, but it's not something that people talk openly about because I think of fear of being judged.
Thanks, Deb. Can I ask a question? Is that all right? Yeah. Yes, I'm answering myself. Yes, you can, Liz. So I just wanted to ask a question that came up in a couple of the presentations, and Martina, you talked about it as the space-time mattering, and I've read in a few different places that there are different conceptualizations of time, particularly amongst Indigenous cultures all around the world, including, the Celtic. And of time being not linear, time being always all around. And so your ancestry is here now, as is your future here now. So I just wondered if you could comment on that concept in terms of birthplace.
Wow, great. I'll comment on it. I'm just thinking, I was attracted to Barrad's kind of conceptual thinking around space-time mattering for that very reason. And I'm sort of picking up, basically, I think being a post-colonial country, our traditions have been well and truly annihilated. So while there are traces there, like I gave the example, that we can find information that the placenta was buried or this, that, or the other. However, when you talk with the people, and I will get, I'm doing a loop here, but I am getting back to your point. But when, I was keep thinking about some of the interviews I conducted, and for example, there was a lot of conflation between matter and poverty. So, for example, when I was chatting with the three guys, the map makers, they were, when I was talking about on the wisp and on the straw, and this idea of birthing onto straw, they were horrified at the idea that a woman should birth onto straw because it's, it's a sign of poverty, and we've moved on. However, then the healing properties of straw for both the humans and the non-human, and this is my interest as well about expanding this kind of and moving into this co-creative and reciprocal way of thinking about space, time, and matter, and how they keep interconnecting and interrelating. I think I was trying to, I'm going down that route because I feel that environmental humanities perspective that Barrad is extolling, if you like, I feel that in the Irish context there's hope going down that route for thinking about space, time, and matter as from that tradition. It's still very Western in a sense, because I feel when you go if you're trying to reconnect with Indigenous culture, it's a minefield in the Irish context. So just wanted to get that out there because it's in my mind at the moment because I'm listening. So it's a complex relationship with our history and poverty and post-colonialism and colonization. And the concept of, as you say, the ancestors always being with you is becoming more current in our thinking. And I feel that taking it through that route of environmental humanities and people like Barrad thinking about the past and the present. There's no past, there's no present. It's there's this constant, continuous. It echoes, what was just being said, but it's through a slightly different lens, a slightly different language. And I feel from my experience in Ireland that gives us a little bit more. I'm more hopeful to think that way. I hope that answers what you're touching on.
Thanks, Martina. Mel, I don't know if you caught that question Just about we've been talking this morning about time and the kind of linear, industrialised sort of timing, particularly on labour and birth, and what happens when we inflict that.
Yeah.
And then these other circular...
I think it's a really great question, because birthing has changed dramatically. You know, time has taken power away from the woman and what she innately knows within her body and what is going on for her. You know, we as a midwife, and I'm sure there's many midwives there, we go off what the woman is telling us a lot of the time, and how she's feeling in herself and in her body. And, you know, we use the powerful instincts of woman in labour, if everything is within normal. And now we've medicalised birth. We're intervening. We're putting time on our intervention, because it's a process now. It's a production. It's, you know, the hospital can only have so many women in labour. The rooms can only be certainly, you know, certain amounts of women can only be in the postnatal ward. It's a production line. So the time is from the system. So women absolutely know their bodies intimately when it comes to having babies. I've been with women that have been in labour for days, and then they turn around and say to me, Mel, this just doesn't feel right. It's like, okay, let's just go with that. And then we do. And then, you know, there's been a couple of times where, you know, that the woman is absolutely right. She knows. And this is where the time is, we're taking the power away from the natural human instincts of knowing ourselves and our bodies. And it's definitely something that impacts how we birth, where we birth. So yeah, it's a great question.
Can I ask a follow-up one then? Sorry, Deb, it will come to you in a sec. But did that factor into the women design at all? Like, how did that filter in the concept?
Absolutely. The space is created. Did you watch the video?
Not yet. We're watching it after this. I mean, I've seen it.
The video, yes, there is birthing rooms. However, the space is open to country, so the women can walk around and still be as if they're walking out in the bush. And it's, you know, there's no clocks on the walls. There's no intervention. It's purely a space where women can be with family and their children and still walk around and feel safe with a midwife just not hovering but around, you know, like, so it's a very unique place, and it's going to be grounded on the ways of hearing how women are labouring. It's based on instinct. It's calm, it's neutral, it's basically just taking it back to how it needs to be in the woman's care, in the woman's hands, and we are just there to facilitate the space.
Thanks, Mel. And Deb, I don't, oh God, I'm echoing now. Did you want to comment on the time question?
I'm not sure how to comment on the question.
You don't have to. We can do the next one.
Can I So, I mean, you were asking about space-time management, but actually, just to respond to what's just been said, I mean, the midwife that I referenced, Philomena Canning, she went before CEDAW, so that's the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, in 2017. And what she brought before them was her concerns about the active management of labour in the Irish context, because the interventions are very high. You probably know the stats better than I, but fundamentally, the policy is to have 3 births 3 births per day. So you have 8 hours. You're on the clock, literally. So that you basically, the turnaround is they want to use one bed 3 times in the day. That's roughly the policy. It varies slightly across the country, but not much. So she took this before CEDAW, and they raised concerns, and they did say their report back was that in Ireland they should allow women to birth at the rate that their body allows. But that isn't the case, because it is all determined through economics, and that is the premise of the active management of labour.
Actually, I can comment on that, actually. So the first study that I touched on just briefly that I did with Ariadne Labs that was looking at birth facilities in the United States. We were kind of exploring this framework or model about like a pressure tank. And looking at different factors in the built environment that exert pressure on the decision making that has to happen in birth on the provider, and how that could lead to higher rate of intervention, so either cesarean or operative delivery, instrumental delivery, induction. And I think that starts to get at maybe what you're talking about around time. And one of the metrics that we were looking at has to do with delivery volume, the ratio of annual delivery volume to the number of delivery beds that you have available to you, and seeing that the more pressure there is to move patients through the space, the increased rate of cesarean delivery for a facility. So if you have a large volume, distributed over not that many delivery beds, we saw a trend towards increased cesarean rate, which makes sense, right? And I think there are other factors that can increase that pressure to move people through as well. And one of the ways you can alleviate it is by having flexible spaces that could be used for overflow beds if you need to. So it's all kind of like a very practical way of answering that question. But
Yeah, or walking around.
yeah,
Stuff like that, yeah. And then, yeah, sorry.
So I have a question for Melanie Briggs. How does Minder Birth Center interact with the government or local authorities and regulations? Do midwives need special papers and permissions to work there? And also in terms of architecture, are there hygiene standards or other regulations that had to be taken into consideration when designing and construction? That would be very interesting. How does the state actually respect the culture? Thanks.
There was 3 questions in there. But thank you, great questions. So we have been lobbying to the government for the last 9 years and what we recognised early is that so we have federal and state. So our state law, well the federal law is private health facilities, and then within the state there's a Private Health Facilities Act. And within that act, originally, it said that we needed to have a medical officer on site for 24/7 care. And obviously that is not the model. The model is midwifery-led care. So we've lobbied to the government for the last, as I said, 9 years, and we have within now the act, so the legislation, we have within that a regulation that says birthing on country demonstration model. So within the birthing on country demonstration regulation, it states that we do not need a medical officer on site, we need them on call. So we changed one word from on site to on call. So that was a big barrier, a big challenge for us. So we've got a new regulation for birthing on country. And then a lot of the act and the wording was nursing. So we're not nurses, we're midwives. So we lobbied again to the Ministry of Health and said we want to remove the word nursing from birthing on country demonstration regulation and say midwife. And so we've updated that to say midwifery-led care. And part of the Act is that we have to have a medical advisory committee which advises on all safety and quality of the birth centre and the intrapartum space. So in that medical advisory committee, there needed to be 5 medical officers, which we pushed back on that, and we said, no, we need midwives and we need Aboriginal cultural leaders and mentors and our local GP, who is an Indigenous woman. So we have pushed back on that, and we have now in our regulation the cultural mentoring and professors in midwifery, so doctors, midwife doctors, around evidence. So that was the first push. And then also to get access to our local hospital. So in New South Wales, there was only one hospital that would allow privately practicing midwives to access, to have a credentialing access agreement. And our local hospital didn't have that, and they didn't know what it looked like. So we had to work together to design it. And so we approached the hospital that did allow midwives to access their services, and we duplicated it here in Shoalhaven. And it took some time. It probably took about 12 to 16 months because the hospital just wasn't set up for us to access it. So we are now, so going into the second question, we have what's called credentialed midwives. So endorsed midwives who have their postgrad 5,000 hours, who are endorsed, who then apply to the local hospital for visiting rights, which then label you as a credentialed midwife. And then when you have your credentialing, you can then be a visiting endorsed midwife who can provide intrapartum services at that local hospital. And our regulation is AHPRA, so it's a National Australian Health Practitioners Registration Authority, and we are all registered through that. I am aware that in Canada, that when we visited the beautiful Six Nations Reserve birth centre, that those beautiful midwives were on treaty lands, and they don't need to be registered through the national body, and that gave us inspiration too. I feel like part of that visit was like, that's self-determining, that's reclamation. So that's why we continue to push for our midwives to be able to birth, to grow in our birth centre and support them in the birthing on country model, to invest in our workforce and create our own pathways that include birthing on country side by side with our credentialed midwives to birth at the birth centre and at the hospital, so that we're building our own workforce, but we are still accredited through the national body. And then the architecture, we visited many spaces. You would have seen in my presentation, we visited the Toronto Birth Centre, Six Nations Reserve, the Child and Family Health, Native Child and Family Health Services, and we've got some local hospitals here that have birthing units who have been upgraded. I think Marilyn's there today. She would have been involved in some of these consultations around birth centre design and units. There's still a lot of work to be done in Australia in terms of standalone birth centres. Sorry, that's my dog. And the architecture is led by the Australasian Health Facilities Guidelines and also the Building Codes of Australia. So there are many requirements that we need to ensure that we are able to be licensed as a birthing facility under the Act. And there's many requirements in terms of National Health and Safety Quality Guidelines. And so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, she's nodding. I'm echoing. Thanks, Mel.
No
Another
worries.
question here from Latif.
Thank you very much. Beautiful presentation by by you both, Deb and Martina. I've got one question for you. Anyway, for one question each for both of you. You talked about place generally in your presentation, and then you finished off with innovation in design, where you mentioned poetic garden, and I was wondering what sort of role do you expect women architects, to play in that, in realizing, that aspect of.
Yeah, no, that's a lovely question. Yeah, no, the Sympoetic Garden, it's speculative at the moment, but the idea, I think, is what I'm trying to promote is this sense of the reciprocal relationship between the body and place. It's not too dissimilar from what Mel is saying, really, in certain respects, but it's just using a slightly different approach. So at the moment, I'm working with a community group, and we've started creating a garden. It's nothing connected with any medical center or anything, but the idea is to sort of grow things. It's a sort of a Sympoetic native garden. So the idea would be to grow things that help particularly women, or, women's health, but also helps the soil and helps the land. So it's this trying to build in that thinking around that when you're thinking in a more than human way, you're thinking about how the microbes are helping, and they're helping the people and the place in this Sympoetic relationship. And so that's what I'm working on with a group of a community group at home in Ennis. And what I would love is to see the idea of a garden incorporated into design, a Sympoetic garden where people, when they're visiting, when they're pregnant and that, they would get to learn about how not only the plants that will help you during pregnancy and for breastfeeding and all of that, but how those plants then help the earth and help the air, and that relationship. So I'd love to see that built into design. So that idea of a Sympoetic design. Yeah.
Deb, you talked, said a lot of things, with your presentation, places that you visited in Botswana, in, is it Zimbabwe, and then we saw a different picture of how things are organized there in terms of the spaces. Some places were, overcrowded, with heaps of things, within the spaces. And then one interesting thing for me, has to do with co-designing a solution. And so I want you to elucidate more on that, to see what midwives on their own, architects and other people that matters in organizing the space. How do we intend to make things better, especially for low resource settings? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. I think I was explaining to a couple of you at the break that it was really fun to engage, especially local architects and designers in Botswana in this workshop, because a lot of them have really, high ideals for, the work they want to do. I think a lot of people in architecture are drawn to doing impactful, meaningful work that gives back. Unfortunately, in Botswana, there are not a lot of opportunities to do that. A lot of people are struggling to find work at all as architects, and the work that they're doing is, like high-end residential for people who can afford. And so I think many of them were very excited to be a part of this project, and some of the methods of co-design, these, design thinking activities, many of them had never done anything like that before. And then the other part of it was the opportunity to work alongside clinicians who could give them, real-time feedback. And they kind of, they worked together to, the clinicians don't have the visual graphic skills to kind of convey what they're thinking and work through different design solutions, but the architects and designers, and we had some students there too who were able to do that. And so there was this really cool dialogue that was happening. It was a really useful process, I think, for me, for this research, for getting ideas, but it was also, I think, really fruitful for them too, to see what's possible and hopefully inspiring to them going forward that they can do things like this. So.
Thank you. And maybe probably got time for one more question, or is that one or two? Yeah.
My questions go to something with poetry, something with arts, kind of lifting us up, having also the architecture, the arts in the architecture, having the ability to lift us up and out of the everyday life in a way. And the birth somehow is both everyday life, it's a place to work, and then it's the greatest moments of our lives. And it's the same at the same time. So in a way, this poetics and the arts. The question is, how can we make room for that in the design briefs? How can we systematically track the history of the place we are working, particular place? How can we make room for the poetry, the songs, the patterns, the rituals, the decorations on the wall, all that stuff? So I guess maybe it's more like something I would like you to elaborate on or just comment on.
I'll make a start. I'm not a designer, so the design side I'm going to leave to all you amazing people. But what I think I'm trying to suggest through this Sympoesis is disrupting the kind of human-centric nature of our way of thinking and putting us as like at the center of everything. And I think I feel that if we can embrace a different way of conceptualizing our relationship within the world, that perhaps that will then hopefully influence design. I am not a designer or an architect, so that is entirely, I'm throwing, there's the brief. But I think it starts with thinking, for me. You have to think differently before you can act differently. So it's challenging ourselves to think of an expanded concept of natality, an expanded concept of birth, so that it isn't just the birth of a baby, it is the birth of land births us, it's that reciprocal relationship that I'd love to imagine that we can grow with that and let that become more of a guiding kind of force in care for place, care for people, and care in design contexts. I hope that answers your question.
That's beautiful, and it's a lovely question, actually, to sort of wrap things up, or I can possibly get back to you, Sarah. Oh, yeah, okay. So I might let the panel respond to that question, and then can I come back to you? Is that all right?
Yeah. I feel like I have a lot of food for thought over the past couple days, or today in particular. I think, I've just started a job position doing health design with a capital H, I guess, for a large architecture firm, and working with some very large health systems in the United States. And I think our conversation earlier about bringing that word spirituality to the design process, I think there's going to be, I think that we have to be brave at the beginning of these conversations to put that word out there and to acknowledge that these spaces are unique and they're different from other health spaces, potentially. But I also think it has to be balanced with I think you have to be clever about how you present the kind of business case, to be honest. I mean, to put it roughly, I guess. But I do think, there are ways of talking about these features of the space that we know are more effective, and they're better spaces for women and families, but they also are marketable, and they're also, they make the health system more competitive in their region. And I think a lot of facilities recognize that that birthing women and families are it's like a foot in the door, into the hospital system. So if you have a good experience giving birth, that you're going to bring your family back for cancer care or for orthopedics or whatever. And labor and delivery may not be a money-making scheme in general compared to other departments, but it has the potential to be a good investment for them. And so I think doing what's right for patients. And improving outcomes. I think there's a way we can talk about that to kind of through the back way get at what we're looking at, which is poetics and spirituality, maybe.
Thanks, Deb. Mel, did you want to comment on that? And then we'll go back to the room.
Thank you. I love this question. It is the foundation of our birth centre. We consulted with our elders and our Aboriginal women, and we asked the women, when you walk into a space, how do you want to feel? And we asked them all to close their eyes and imagine walking into a space where it's grounding, it's calm, there's no hurry, it's you're what do you want to smell? What do you want to hear? And the women always went back to, I want to feel like I'm walking in the bush at home, because that is what birthing on country traditionally was, out in the bush. And so we made sure that all the senses and the colours and the lighting were what women envisaged when they walked into the space. And I'm not sure if anyone, and a lot of the Native Child and Family Services, I remember going there and they had a hallway and they told us a very spiritual story about this hallway, and it had all the Native names up along the wall, and I showed a picture of it in the presentation. And the stories that came through there, it was, you felt the goosebumps and the hairs on your arms stood up, and that's how you want to feel when you walk into a space and you want to be welcomed from the ancestors. And as you walk in, you say, can I enter? Have permission? Birthing is very sacred and very spiritual. So we have prayers that will be at the front door as you walk in. There's songs on the ceremony space that's written in language, so it's reclamation of language as well, because it was taken from us. The people who greet you, and having bush medicine just outside of the room, like that's poetry, right? This is country, where we're bringing country back into the birthing space, and we're bringing women back into a space where they can sense country, they can feel country, and have no awareness of time. There's no need for that. We're the clinicians. We need to have that, not the woman. And then, we have what's called middens in Australia, where it's the shells from where our people used to eat, or a burial site, or, so they're shells. And so what we're actually doing is collecting shells from country and putting them into the birth centre. So then that gives us an opportunity to talk about country and our our history of collecting food and what that means in birthing and you know, from the spirit world to the physical world. And also it's really important that Indigenous women, local Indigenous women, care for their local Indigenous women. And that is because if we're getting looked after by our own people, our tongue, our language, our song, our prayers, everything is localised, and it's grounding. Yeah, I feel like it's important for mob to care for mob, and because I know that when we've got, because I'm a local Koori woman, Indigenous woman to this area, and I speak the language, and you know, it's lovely for those, and we talk about what words do you want your baby to hear for the very first time coming from the spirit world to the physical world, and they always say, I want my language to be spoken, I want my baby to hear this, and you do that. So I love this question. Thank you for asking it.
I love your answer. It's so specific, and it really brings how midwifery and how Indigenous midwifery responds to that need. So thank you so much. I don't have much to add except to say that as a South Asian midwife, it's been very rare for me to look after my own in North America, but that's happened more and more as more Indians are there and more Indians become comfortable with the idea of midwifery. And it's the same thing for me. I know what food to suggest to them when they need, you know, more protein, or then, you know, they're feeling nauseous. I know the importance of the mothers or the mother-in-laws, or, you know, or the 11th day naming ceremony, and that makes it brings them back to a sense of confidence that actually they are part of this long ancestral knowledge of that birth works. So I agree. We have lots of data which we've turned into poems. Those could be on the walls. You could have songs, but you have to then think also about the different people who are coming into those birth spaces and how we can personalize it to their, you know, what birthing on country means to them.
Thank you, Sarah and Saraswati. And I think we probably need to wrap it up. If anyone's got an idea of the time, I do. Yep. So I think that's a beautiful point to end on, and that kind of the crossover between life and art and creativity and poetry, and it's all one big thing, really. And if we just kind of keep that reflection, that it's a kind of continuous current of all of it all the time. We'll bring that into tomorrow, perhaps. Thanks so much. Thanks, Mel. Thanks, Deb. Thanks, Martina.
Thank you.